Just as a side note, his personal story, if I could, just for a second. His dad was a taxi driver, his mother was a nurse, and to see him now is quite a thing. So thank you for being here. It really is something very, very special.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
I want to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between and where we're going. But let's just start very basically. If AI was a baseball game, what inning are we in? Where are we in this? Because I think so many of us have played with ChatGPT and other kinds of AI products. We all think we know what it is a little bit. We all keep talking about what the future of our life is going to be with AI. It might be helpful just to sort of level set for us where we really are.
Look, I think the challenge is that as humans, we are riddled with biases of all kinds. So we look back and it feels incremental, but in the moment, it really is far more exponential than people realize. I mean, 2 years ago, nobody was talking about agents, AI systems that can take actions in your world. Today, everybody is excited that over the next couple of years, agents are going to be everywhere, doing things on our behalf, organizing our lives, prioritizing and planning. 4 years ago, nobody was really talking about language models. Today, everybody is talking about language models. So it's just a very surreal experience to be inventing technologies which at one moment feel impossible, and then just a few years later are now, coming to pass. If you just think about it, it is now possible to ask any one of these chatbots any question that you could possibly imagine and get an answer that is pretty much as good as any one of us could answer in this room on average. And it's easy to take that for granted, but that is like years and years of very slowly and steadily adding capability, researching, experimenting, testing things out, and then in sum, it really, I think, creates quite a magical experience. So if I were to look out over the next 10 years, it feels like we're right at the very beginning of this moment.
ChatGPT, but others talk about AGI, this sort of world where artificial generalized intelligence can effectively do everything, anything and everything. That is sort of the thing that is both the great opportunity and also the thing that I think people fear in many ways. Is that on your decade-long roadmap?
I just not quite sure that's a sort of helpful framing. I mean, we tend to get fixated on super intelligence, this moment when an AI could do every single task that a human can do better than humans. And, if you really push me, I have to say, theoretically, it is possible. And we should take the safety risks associated with that super seriously. I have been advocating for the safety and ethics of AGI for almost 15 years, and so I really do care about it a lot, but people tend to lunge at it as though it is A, inevitable, B, desirable, and C, coming tomorrow. And I just think neither of those things are true. It is an unprecedented technology, and as a species, we're going to have to figure out a new kind of global governance mechanism so that technology continues to always serve us and make us more healthy and happier and make us more efficient and add value in the world. Because there is a risk that the technologies that we develop this century do end up causing more harm than good. And that is just a kind of curse of progress. We have to face that reality, right? These technologies are going to spread far and wide. Everybody is going to have the capacity to influence people at scales previously considered to be completely unimaginable. And so that's really going to be a question of governance and regulation.
Can I ask you a question, which is that leaders in this industry, including yourself and Sam Altman and so many others, have gone to Capitol Hill and elsewhere around the world and said, please, we need regulation. That there are lots of problems potentially with this technology. It's unique in that very few industries do the CEOs go to the regulators and say, please regulate me. Is that a sincere effort, or is that a protective effort to say, look, we told you there could be problems, we knew you were never going to regulate us anyway, see social media, and here we are now?
Again, I think that this is also a false frame. Is it a sincere effort, or is it actually about regulatory capture?
Because if there was actual regulation, I have a funny feeling we would have a different conversation about which pieces were regulated and how it's regulated, and there'd be a lot of pushback all of a sudden.
Maybe it's because I'm a sort of Brit with European tendencies, but I don't fear regulation in the way that sort of everyone seems to by default think that regulation is evil here. I think there is no technology in history that hasn't been successfully regulated. All of just look at a car. I mean, we've been regulating cars since the 20s, and that has consistently, steadily made cars better. And it's not just the car itself. It's the street lights, it's the traffic lights, it's the zebra crossings, it's the culture of safety around developing a car, driving a car, so this is just a healthy dialogue that we just need to encourage and stop framing as a kind of black and white. It's either evil regulation or it's cynically minded to drive regulatory capture. I think it's a great thing that technologists and entrepreneurs and CEOs of companies like myself and Sam, who I love dearly and think is awesome, he is not cynical, he is sincere, he believes it genuinely, so do the rest of them. And I think that's just great. We should embrace that. And of course, there will be downsides to it, right? So I'm not denying that, poor regulation can slow us down, make us less competitive, create challenges with our international adversaries, and it certainly shouldn't slow down the open source community or the startups.
Let me ask you a more complicated question. Microsoft has a deep, deep relationship with OpenAI. That is how Microsoft, at least for right now, is pursuing its AI ambitions. I know there's lots of other efforts underneath it, and we're going to talk about those in a minute. But you referenced Sam Altman, who's going to be here and speaking tomorrow. There have been a lot of headlines, and I want you to help us make some sense of them, where we have seen a number of people inside OpenAI who worked on their safety teams at OpenAI not just leave the company, but openly object to the approach that the company has taken. I'm going to read you a quote from one of the people on those safety teams who left. He said, "These problems are quite hard to get right, and I am concerned we aren't on a trajectory to get them right." It is very unusual to see employees leave and speak out the way they have about what's happening inside OpenAI. What do you think is happening?
Look, I'm proud that we live in a country and we operate in a tech ecosystem where there can be whistleblowers, and those whistleblowers are encouraged and supported. And if those people feel like this is the moment where they need to make that statement, I celebrate and support that. I personally have enormous respect for everything that OpenAI has achieved. I think they're going to go down as one of the defining technology companies in history. And I genuinely think that they're grappling in a sincere way with the challenge of pushing forward with the technology as fast as possible, but also putting safety on the table front and center. I mean, they've been leading the safety research agenda. Let's just be clear about that. Publishing papers, committing to academic archives, attending the conferences, raising awareness of these issues, open sourcing safety tooling and infrastructure.
So take us though inside the...
Sincerely disagree about the same observations. So some individuals look at the exponential trajectory that we're on, and they will argue that for the last 6 years, we have seen an order of magnitude more compute and more data applied to the same method, so 10 times more compute and 10 times more data applied every single year, in fact, for the last decade. And each time you add 10x more, you deliver very measurable improvements in capabilities. The models produce fewer hallucinations. They can absorb more information, more factual information. They can integrate real-time information, and they're more open to stylistic control. So you can tune their behavior, both from a product perspective and from a sort of the personality of the model. And the people who are most scared about this argue that they can see a path over the next 3 or 4 or 5 orders of magnitude, call it 5 years, 8 years, where that capability trajectory doesn't slow down, actually. It just gets better and better and better. The counter argument to that is that we're actually running out of data. We need to find new sources of information to learn from, and we don't know that it's just going to keep getting better. There could asymptote, right? And we've seen that many times in the history of technology. So I think it's a healthy debate to have.
You mentioned the word hallucination. And anyone who's played with any of these products has probably experienced a moment where it appears that the bot has hallucinated. One of the things we hear from people in the industry is they say, you know what, we can't really explain why it hallucinates, and we can't really explain what's going on inside the box. Can you?
I think, so I can't, in a way that would satisfy you. But I also can't explain why you chose to wear a blue shirt this morning. I can explain very little about who you or I are. The requirement for explanation is, I think, again, a little bit of a human bias. When I ask you to explain why you had scrambled eggs for breakfast this morning, you will creatively imagine an explanation in hindsight. And depending on your mood and the context that you're in and the other like associated metadata of the explanation, you're probably going to say it slightly differently. And it's not clear that it was entirely causal. There is some basis in reality for it, but this one-to-one mapping is a very hyper-rational imposition on the way that we think as humans. In fact, we just don't really operate like that. We operate, I think, far more by association.
Should we worry about that, though? I mean, should we worry that it's one thing to not understand ourselves. It's another to not understand how the computer gets, most people think that all of this is just a big mathematical problem, right? 2 + 2 should always equal 4. If it's not equaling 4, we need to understand what's wrong with the computer, right?
Yeah, that's just not how sort of human reasoning and culture actually works, in my opinion. Human reasoning works as a result of behavioral observations. When you consistently do the same thing over and over again, I gain trust. You become more reliable. When you tell me that you are unsure about something, and then I look back and it turns out that your uncertainty was a correct assessment of that outcome, that uncertainty gives me reassurance, right? So I learn to trust you and to interact with you by observation. And I think that that's actually how we all operate in relation to one another, is how we produce culture and society. And that's how we'll treat these models. There was a competition of radiologists 3 months ago. Panels of radiologists in this live environment, tens of the very best consultants going head-to-head against the machine. And obviously there's lots of skepticism. Why is the machine producing this correct cancer diagnosis? Why is it producing this correct eye examination and identifying that this is glaucoma? Well, we can sort of allude to some of the training data that it has used to train on it, but the fact is it's doing it more accurately, more reliably than the human. I think that empirical observation of the facts is what we should rely on to be able to trust these systems.
One of the things you said just before that was the idea that the AI machines, the training that AI does, is running out of data to consume. And we're going to have a conversation, I think, in a moment, or at least I want to talk about the idea of synthetic data. That is actually digital data that's almost reproduced off of data that doesn't exist. But I want to actually ask you about the data that does exist. There are a number of authors here at the Aspen Ideas Festival, and a number of journalists as well. And it appears that a lot of the information that has been trained on over the years has come from the web. And the question, and some of it's the open web and some's not, and we've heard stories about how OpenAI was turning YouTube videos into transcripts and then training on the transcripts. And who is supposed to own the IP? Who is supposed to get value from that IP? And whether, to put it in very blunt terms, whether the AI companies have effectively stolen the world's IP.
Yeah, I think, look, it's a very fair argument. Partly that's true. I've got worse at remembering telephone numbers since I've had my phone, right? When I was young, I remembered probably 40 or 50 numbers. So I definitely am losing some skills. Maybe my map navigational skills are not quite as good now because I just go to Google Maps or Apple Maps straight away, right? So there are going to be some shifts that we have to make. But net, I believe that if we really embrace this technology and respond with the governance in an agile way, it's super important. It's clear that some of our kids were getting phone addiction. It's clear that they were spending far too much time in social media, that it was making them feel anxious and frustrated. And frankly, it was probably obvious to those of us in technology sooner than we made a big fuss about it, right? So what we have to do is make sure that we're reacting with our interventions and our governance as fast as we're creating the technology.
Okay, let me ask you a different question. There are a number of entrepreneurs in this room, some in the digital space, some who are trying to get into AI, and others who are thinking about it. what would you advise them in terms of where to go and what to do and what industries or places that there's going to be opportunity? And in a world in which AI should be able to write all of these apps and other programs for me at any moment,
Yeah.
if there is no defensive moat around a business because AI is going to be able to just do it for you, what would anybody invest in anyway?
Look, I think that there is going to be this bifurcation where at the very largest scales with the greatest capital infrastructure, we're going to be producing 100% free, are within 18 months of the quality and performance as they were in the private space, just a moment ago. And that's a very, very big deal, right? And I think that trajectory is going to continue. GPT-3 cost tens of millions of dollars to train and is now available free and open source. You can operate on a single phone, certainly on a laptop. GPT-4, the same story. So I think that that's going to make the raw materials necessary to be creative and entrepreneurial cheaper and more available than ever before.
Okay, so I know you're at one of now the big giants in tech, but let me ask you this. How do you think, very honestly, about the concentration of power in technology, especially as it relates to AI? Because one of the things that's fascinating about AI, at least for these large language models, is you need an enormous amount of compute, which means you need an enormous amount of money. And this is not stuff that's being built in a garage anymore. And so the true power has actually gone back to Microsoft. You ended up back at Microsoft. There is Google. Amazon is trying to build an AI. Even OpenAI, which was on its own, decided to ultimately partner with Microsoft. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Lena Khan and others have looked at it. It's not that there's been wholesale mergers of these things, but even the partnerships unto themselves.
Yeah, look, it makes me very anxious. The reality is everywhere you look, we see rapid concentrations, whether it's in news media and the power of the New York Times, the Financial Times, the Economist, the great news organizations, or whether it's in cities, the concentration of power around a few big metropolitan elite cities, or whether it's in technology companies. And the practical fact is that over time, power compounds. Power has a tendency to attract more power because it can generate the intellectual resources and the financial resources to be successful and outcompete in open markets. So while on the one hand, it feels like an incredibly competitive situation between Microsoft, Meta, Google, and so on, it clearly is also true that we're able to make investments that are just unprecedented in corporate history. This is another false frame. It's actually very much also true in the context of our race with China. We're going head to head. It's zero sum. There will be a finish line, and when we cross it, we will have an AGI, and if we get it 3 years before them, we'll be able to disempower them. This is just, stop it. We have to stop framing everything as an adversarial race. It is true that we have ferocious competition with them. They are an independent company. We don't own or control them. We don't even have any board members. So they do entirely their own thing, but we have a deep partnership. I'm very good friends with Sam, have huge respect and, trust and faith in what they have done. And that's how it's going to roll for many, many years to come. But we have different set of values. And frankly, when I look out over the next century, I think that peace is going to be a product of us, as in the West, and particularly America leading the tip of the spear there, knowing how to gracefully degrade the empire that we have managed over the previous century. Because this is a rising power of phenomenal force with a different set of values for us. And so we have to find ways to coexist without judgment, without going to war with them unnecessarily, because I think that would be terrible for both of us.
You may differ with my next framing, but I'm going to try.
Great.
There is a debate in the industry, whether you like it or not, about this idea of open source versus closed source AI. One is closed source is a lot of the things that actually OpenAI and you're doing at Microsoft. Open source is available to the public. You can see inside of it. And right now, you would argue that Meta, the owner of Facebook, is the leader there with its Llama product. There are questions about both models. Elon Musk thinks everything should be open source. And I know a whole bunch of people who think that there's a fear that actually if you allow the open source stuff into the wild, that it could be misused, and therefore that's why there are advocates for closed source.
Yeah. Okay. So again, obviously, I object to the framing. So we at Microsoft, in my 4th week, open sourced the strongest model for its weight class, Phi 3, that is in the world, hands down, still is. You can use it on mobiles and on desktop, the best open source model. So we totally believe in open source as well. Again, it's a misframing, but we also believe in creating very powerful, very large, very expensive models, which we may open source some of over time. So it's not that we're against open source at all. Right. We just, see that you have to have a mixture of approaches.
All of these large language models, and I know there's smaller models as well, but the large language models in particular, as I mentioned at the beginning, require a huge amount of computing power. And that also means they require a ton of energy. There are a whole number of conversations happening here at the Aspen Ideas Festival around energy use and climate and the like. And I am curious what you think about, given all of the pledges, frankly, that technology companies made even only 2 and 3 and 4 years ago around climate and getting to zero by 2030 and the like. It appears that on this trajectory, all of those things would go out the window.
No. So look, Microsoft's already 100% renewable by the end of this year. By 2030, it will be fully net zero. We're actually, 100% sustainable on our water by the end of next year. So look, we're very committed to keeping up with that. And the good news about new demand is that it comes with a new opportunity to reinforce sustainability, whereas old supply, I think, is much harder to move. So I think that we're actually in a very good place on it. It's true that it's going to put unprecedented burden on the grid because scale-wise, we're definitely consuming far more energy than the grid has previously managed. But it's, the grid is long overdue a radical uplift, right? These are the kinds of infrastructure investments that we need to be making in our countries in the West for the future of, our societies, spending less on war and more on spending hundreds of billions of dollars up-leveling our grid so that we can manage all of the new spare battery capacity that's going to come from local generation in your homes and small businesses and cars.
Do you think, you've spent a lot of time in Washington, do you think the folks in Washington, which I think struggle to even understand social media, understand this, whether it comes to the implications of AI, but also the energy implications and everything else?
Yeah, I think to some extent the conversation is shifting now towards the renewable energy question. I think people do realize that we're consuming vast amounts of energy and, this has to shift, but this isn't going to shift just because Microsoft buy 100% renewable, which of course Google does as well, and the other companies are heading in that direction. So I think it should be celebrated that we're setting a bit of a standard, but it needs national infrastructure to support that transition.
How do you think about the competition with others and the idea that it is possible that actually these large language models, and maybe you'll disagree with this framing, could become commoditized, which is to say, you've got one, Google has one, Apple's now partnering with OpenAI, but they're apparently going to partner with lots of other people. Amazon, which owns a piece of Anthropic, you could argue has one and is building its own. Will everybody have one? And if everybody has one, how valuable is it anyway?
Look, as knowledge proliferates, everything essentially becomes commoditized. App development used to be a super unique, highly skilled set of things that only a tiny group of people. Now everyone can spin up an app instantly. Web development, do you remember when that was like a real thing? Now you can just sort of plug and play and drag buttons around, and you need no technical skills whatsoever other than being able to point a mouse to build a pretty decent website. So over time, as the knowledge and capability proliferates, it does become commoditized.
How do you think about AI and how fully integrated, and this goes to a privacy question, also goes to, by the way, an antitrust question, should get integrated into everything? Which is to say, for example, right now, the EU, as you know, has accused Microsoft of breaching antitrust rules. You should know Apple has delayed introducing its own AI features in the EU because of the regulatory environment. And I think there's a real question about, how connected all of these products need to be, frankly, both to work, but also therefore then what they do to the rest of the business.
Yeah, I mean, and that is a different, that is a different reality to what we've experienced in the past, where every second that we can gain in putting technology out into the world is always producing net benefit. And I just think these technologies are becoming so powerful, they will be so intimate, they'll be so ever present, that this is a moment where it's fine to take stock and think. And if it takes 6 months longer or 18 months longer, or maybe even longer than that, it's time well spent.
Right. I want to open up to the idea of emotional intelligence and AI. This was something that you actually spent a lot of time thinking about and working on when it came to Inflection and what Inflection was about.
Yeah.
Inflection, his AI original project has a remarkable emotional IQ or EQ component